Welcome back, Honors. All right, so welcome back to it, and you guys have been crushing it. I'm very, very proud. But the big thing about it is we are now getting into a very in-depth discussion about economics, exploration, all this stuff that's going to happen, and why 1492 is probably one of the most significant years in Western civilization's history, right? Because we are now getting into the point where Europeans are going to be places they're not supposed to be, right? They're not necessarily supposed to be in North America amongst these native populations. We're going to get into like diseases that are going to get spread and a lot of other stuff and the reactions and immediate actions that people are going to take, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, how this is going to affect European economics. But the big thing about it is it all starts with this guy, or does it? Well, this is the interesting part of this little story before we get anywhere else. This is supposed to be Christopher Columbus, right? Now, ironically enough, we're not sure that this is Christopher Columbus because there's technically actually no portrait of Christopher Columbus that has ever been verified and formally identified as being him for sure, all right? We believe that this is Columbus, but we're not positive, right? So we actually have no idea what Columbus looks like. And a lot of that has to do with how his story played out. Because he actually starts out being very, very heralded as a hero for finding new land in the new world and blah, 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 and like all this other stuff. But the big thing about it is you got to understand that he actually is going to be disgraced by the time that everything goes down. Now, this is not meant to try and sway your opinion about Columbus Day or anything like that. It's much more along the lines of like I'm telling you the facts, all right? I'm telling you the story, what actually happened. And a big place you got to start out is just like why, all right? So because look, first of all, as we go forward, okay, that's his signature right there. What do we already know about Columbus? Now, I know it says on the board, okay, on board, okay? That's meant to be a joke, told in class, like get it on board, he was on a boat, but the big thing, though, about Columbus is we can't really write these things on the board right now due to the fact that we're not in class together. So with this flip, I'll go ahead and tell you a couple of things I bet you know about Columbus before we go any further. I bet you know that he's Italian. I bet you know that he was sent by the Spanish royals, Isabella and Ferdinand, who will be on the test that you do need to know. Make sure you highlight their names in your notes, all right? So I bet you know that there are several other things about him, like he was this, he was that, blah, 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 blah. The things you probably don't know are things like his motivation, okay? So the important items that you need to understand are this stuff, right? First of all, where is he from? He's from a place called Genoa, all right? Genoa. Genoese people are very, 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 very smart. They're very wealthy, and they wanted to be a trade empire like the Venetians, right? So the big thing about it, you got to understand, is that people from Venice during the 1400s and people from Genoa during the 1400s had a massive rivalry. And to give you a heads up, Venice and Genoa are both in what you would call now modern-day Italy, all right? But they were states inside of modern-day Italy. So people from Venice and people from Genoa don't like each other because people from Venice were a big reason why the Renaissance started in the first place, right? They were bringing all those trade goods in because of the Ottomans and the Byzantine empires. They were the ones selling the spices up front. They were the ones making all of the money. They were the ones that were at the canals and the beauty and the Renaissance and the this and the Republic up until 1888. Now, the big thing about it, continuing forward though, is the fact that Venice is going to continue to do these things. Genoa tries to cut into Venetian trade markets by trying to cut off trade ports for them, trying to establish forts in the Black Sea, trying to do all this other stuff, but it never really pans out for him. So what Columbus was trying to do was trying to find a brand new route to India so they could cut Venice out of the spice trade market. That's why he did what he did in the first place. He wanted to clip them out and move forward and be like, Genoa is the dominant city. And he actually is the first wave of what you would call people known as conquistadors, right? Now, the big thing about what a conquistador is, okay, a conquistador is a Spanish conqueror, right? Now, he is not Spanish, he's Italian, but that's his big motivation, was he wanted to make a lot of money. He actually asked Genoa for money and ships to go and do his idea, head west, and they said no. And then he went to France, and then they said no. And then he went to Portugal, and then they said no, because they were like, we're going around Africa, we're doing our own thing. He finally found agreement from Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain after being denied once, okay? But they make the agreement with him, like we talked about in class, was the 90-10 split, right? 90% of whatever you find goes to us, 10% goes to you. And as Megan LaCour astutely noticed in class, 10% of all that stuff that he's about to find is a lot of money, all right? So now also, though, what he does when he lands in the Bahamas is he is going to use Christianity to help enslave a nonviolent people, right? And those are known as the Taino people, right? So the Taino people refused, jot this down, refused to accept Christianity, right? They had no intent, they had no wants, they had no desire to accept Christianity. They had their own God, their own polytheistic system, they had their own religion. And most times, more often than not, people who have a religion are not in the market to accept a brand new one, right? So the Taino people didn't really want to accept Christianity, and Columbus is going to use this as his motivation to be like, oh, well, since you're refusing to do this, I can now violently intervene, right? So he is going to then enslave many of them. He takes 3 of them back to Isabella and Ferdinand as gifts. I'm not kidding. He enslaved 3 people and gave them to the king and queen of Spain as a present. All right, so like that is disgusting. Okay, there are also huge other like instances of violence and things that have happened, but all of it was motivated by one particular thing: that contract. Right, that contract is the big motivator behind his lust for like profit, because he's going to get 10% of everything found. Right, that's huge, and a big thing that actually pushes this whole thing forward is this interesting event, okay? So while he's there, Columbus and his interpreters, after they're trying to figure out how to talk to the Taino people, they see that they're wearing gold jewelry, right? Ooh. So when they see this, Columbus is like, where'd you get that? They're like, oh, well, we have a little bit here. Not a lot, but a little. But we actually got most of it from these people over in Mexico who have a ton of it. And the people they were referring to were actually the Aztec people, right? So this moment of seeing gold jewelry on these native Taino people is going to be what drives Columbus to try and find as much gold as absolutely possible, right? And he is going to adopt the policy of conquest, right? And the funniest thing about it is he still expected that China was right around the corner, right? He expected that he would bop around all the Caribbean islands and that he was eventually going to run into this person known as the Great Khan, which is the leader of the Mongolians who controlled China at the time, even though ironically, they didn't control them at this point in time. But the big thing is he thought he was like right next door to Japan, okay? He had no clue where he was, but he did adopt this policy of conquest, right? And he decides that he's going to start taking over the Taino people, forcing them to find gold as much as possible. And he does this on 4 separate voyages, right? And he enslaved the indigenous people of Hispaniola, which is the island that the Taino people sit on, okay? So, and that's actually where the island where the Dominican Republic and Haiti is now. He enslaves them, and also he unintentionally spread disease, okay? So let's go ahead and discuss this real fast. Let's talk about the big diseases that the conquistadors are going to spread, okay? So with the disease, go ahead and write this down. They are going to accidentally spread smallpox, measles, and influenza. All right, so an influenza, spelled I-N-F-L-U-E-N-Z-A, okay, influenza is just a fancy word for the flu. All right, so the big thing about it with this is that these natives have absolutely no immunity to this whatsoever. All right, and we'll talk about why that is when we get to the Aztecs in class and stuff like that. But that's the big reason why, okay? They literally had zero immunity to it. So the indigenous people of the Caribbean islands, 90% of them are going to die from disease and exposure, all right? So, and that's smallpox, measles, and influenza, okay? Now, also, to the remaining ones that live, Christopher Columbus allows his colonists to perpetrate extreme violence, okay? Now, let's discuss this for a minute. The colonists he brought were even worse than he was, okay? So when he went there on his second voyage, he brought more boats and more people to start some small settlements there, right, to create some colonies. And Columbus told them, by any means necessary, find ways for these people to gather up gold. There are these stories about how they would force them to fill bells, like a bell that you would ring, but turn them upside down and fill them with gold dust. And if they didn't fill it enough, they would cut their hands off, right? There are instances of that. There are stories of assault. There are stories of Spanish colonials throwing natives into pits with Spanish war dogs and watching the dogs kill them. There are all kinds of other things. And the worst part about it was Columbus, like I said, he had 4 different voyages to the Caribbean Caribbean islands, which means he would routinely go from the Caribbeans back to Spain, back to Caribbean, back to Spain. And he did this multiple times. And while he was gone, the violence was at its worst, right? And he left his brother behind to actually be in charge. And when he comes back one time, he could not stop them from committing violence against the natives, right? He couldn't get them to quit. He asked his brother to put one of them on trial and to execute one of the colonists. And the colonists broke out in a revolt against Columbus himself. And a royal investigation is going to make it so Columbus gets returned back to Spain, arrested in chains. And he actually dies with kind of a terrible name about him. And that's one reason why we believe that we don't have a really good portrait of him, is because within a few years, he went from being the biggest deal in Spain to being a criminal in Spain, right? And the control of his discoveries, because of these arrests and because of this dissemination of bad ideas, passes directly to the royals. And when he died, he thought, like I said, he thought China was right around the corner. So Columbus is not somebody that's that great. He's not a really good person. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that he had no ability to stop the people that he was in charge of from committing these atrocities, right? Now, later explorers are also going to show up as well, okay? So explorers including people like Amerigo Vespucci, who we're going to get to here in a second. But you also have to understand as well that other Europeans are going to start pushing into these areas too. So big thing about it is the Europeans are aware that, you know, the Portuguese have trade routes that go all the way to India. They are aware that the Spanish have found new land over in the West, okay? They're aware of these things. So a big thing that's going to occur is the Dutch are going to start trying to move through there as well, okay? Now, why are they doing this? Mainly out of a lot of different reasons, but a lot of it also has to do with resentment, okay? The Dutch were formerly controlled by the 1580s by the Spanish themselves, right? Because they were a part of the Holy Roman Empire. They were controlled by this guy named Philip II, Charles V. We'll get into all that stuff later on. But the Moluccas Islands is where they set up shop. And the Moluccas Islands are all right here, okay? This is the Moluccas Islands, also known as the Spice Islands, right? Because they could grow spices just like India could. And they also set up a very, very big fort on this island known as Java, right? So what's the point of this point of information? Julia, I know Colleen are probably asking, like, so what do I need to know from this? Other Europeans are getting involved now too, right? The Dutch are now moving into the Asian, the Asian sphere that the Portuguese control. And then also, eventually, the English and the French are going to show up as well in North America. But nobody really starts going to North America to take things away from Spain until this guy pops up, which his name is Amerigo Vespucci, right? And Amerigo Vespucci is a very important figure. He is an Italian cartographer. He is a map maker, right? And he goes on being employed by the royals of Spain. He goes to the Caribbean islands and he starts creating maps of these islands, right? And then eventually they take him over to Mexico and he starts creating maps of Mexico as well. And he is the first one, jot this down, he is the first one that realizes, hold up, these are not just islands. This is two humongous new land masses, right? And so in honor of his discovery, discovering the fact that he knew that there were two brand new huge land masses and that there was a whole new world here, they renamed those two new land masses after him. They called it the Americas, right? And that's why it's North and South America, is after Amerigo Vespucci. Now, once everybody starts figuring out, though, that there's a whole nother world out there, that's when we're going to see this happen. The Treaty of Tortoisius, which is going to be signed by Portugal and Spain, written by the Pope, right? That's our line of demarcation. We talked about it already. You do not need to write this down. You do not need to write this down. I was just bringing it back up again so you would kind of be able to notice that, oh, okay, I see. They had this treaty written because now we know that there are two huge new worlds out here, or not worlds, two new continents out here, and that Asia is over here to keep Portugal and Spain from fighting. Alexander VI, the Pope at the time, draws this line, right? And actually, fun, interesting fact really quick, if you actually jump back real fast, and let's see if I can actually find a map of the world real quick, which I don't have one up for some reason. Map of world, DMaps. All right, so here we go. When the line was originally drawn, and this is a very, very interesting little fact, and it will definitely be extra credit on your test. Now, here we go. The big thing about it is when they drew the line originally, they actually screwed it up a little bit and and the line went like this. Weep, and then cut the tip of Brazil off, right? And since it cut off the tip of Brazil, that means that since Portugal gets this entire half to do with whatever they want, the Portuguese actually started a little settlement right there. And that's why, it's known as Rio, right? And that's why people in Brazil speak Portuguese. It's because the line of demarcation was not drawn properly. Jocelyn Caceres, I know you probably find that very interesting, but that's why people in Brazil speak Portuguese instead of Spanish. It's because the Portuguese colonized it, because this little line of demarcation cut the tip off, right? So now I think that's phenomenally interesting anyway. Then we're almost done, okay? So then you're going to see a couple other people pop up, and one of the biggest ones is this guy known as Magellan, right? Now, Ferdinand Magellan is going to be a major figure. He is the first person to try and do this, okay? Jot this down. He tries to circumnavigate the globe, okay? Ferdinand Magellan tries to circumnavigate the globe, right? Since Amerigo Vespucci has figured out that there are two brand new continents out there, Magellan, as a Portuguese sailor, takes it upon himself to leave from Portugal and try to find a route all the way around the world to try and create better maps and understand and explore unknown parts of these maps that the Portuguese had no idea existed. So Ferdinand Magellan starts his route, and he is considered to this day to be the first person to actually circumnavigate the globe, even though ironically enough, he didn't, because he died halfway through it, right? But he leaves from Portugal, and he bounces around through Cape Verde, he comes through here, and then he gets all the way down to this place that we know is called Cape Horn, all right? So he gets all the way here and passes through, right? Now, when he gets here, his ship almost sinks twice, all right? Because there's so many storms that happen there because of the winds coming off of Antarctica, right? And it was so chaotic and so bad that he actually was like, I don't think we're going to make it. But when he got out into this water out here, he said, this is the most calm and peaceful water I have ever seen. And so he named that area of water the Pacific Ocean, right? So because it is peaceful waters, right? That's where the name Pacific comes from. But then he eventually continues his expedition, comes all the way around the world, and then eventually gets to come on, let me do it. Come on. There we go. He ends up here, okay, in these islands now commonly known as the Philippines, okay? Now, he lands in the Philippines. He tries to convert the native Filipino people to Christianity. They don't agree, and he actually dies in the Philippines, right? So Magellan dies in the Philippines before he ever finishes his journey. They cut his head off. They actually brought his dead body back to Portugal, but that's the only thing that made it all around. Actually, his voyage did finish, so the voyage of Ferdinand Magellan went all the way around the world, but he himself did not make it around alive, all right? So very important thing that you know that. There we go. And then last but not least, you're going to have some early French and English explorations, right? From the 1490s to the 1570s, the French and the English, after hearing that Amerigo Vespucci has figured out that these are two brand new continents, decide that since we're there, like the English decide since they're a Protestant country, they can do whatever they want. They're like, you know what? Screw it. And they just head over there and try to find and establish some settlements, right? In North America on the East Coast that you now know as the United States of America. And the French go there as well. The French end up in Canada, which is why I have this funny little picture of a beaver right here. They end up in Canada, and they actually find a lot of money in two things, right? They find a lot of money in fur trapping, which is why there's a beaver there, right? So like actually like killing beavers, skinning them, and actually, you know what I mean, selling their furs. And then also codfish. But the problem is that early English and French exploration does not go well, which is why I have a thumbs down right here. They make money off fur and cod, yes, but they can't establish colonies, and write this down, because the climate in North America was too harsh. The winters were brutal and the summers were very hot, and they could not actually stay there and live, and so it's going to take them some time to create colonies, and the English are going to do that successfully first in the early 1600s, all right? So, but we're going to get to that stuff later on. I'll talk to you about it in class. Y'all have a good one.